December 16th, 1944. 5:30 in the morning. Along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes forest of Belgium and Luxembourg, approximately 2,000 German guns opened fire simultaneously. American headquarters were caught completely off guard. Entire regiments began retreating. Roads clogged with refugees. Communications broke down within the first hour. Within hours, the Germans had done something almost no one in the Allied High Command had thought possible. They had achieved complete operational surprise. History remembers the Battle of the Bulge as Hitler's last gamble, but that isn't the real mystery. The real mystery is this. Germany actually achieved the surprise it wanted. So why did the offensive still have almost no chance of succeeding? Because surprising the Allies was only the first step. Winning the battle required 6 more miracles, and Germany, in December of 1944, could not produce a single one of them. Germany won the surprise at the Bulge. It still couldn't win the battle. To understand the offensive, you have to understand what Germany looked like in the fall of 1944. France had been liberated. Belgium had been liberated. Allied armies were at the borders of the Reich itself. In the east, Soviet forces had reached the Vistula and would within weeks be positioning for the Vistula-Oder offensive that would carry them to within 40 miles of Berlin. Germany was, by any measurable standard, losing the war. In September of 1944, Hitler summoned his senior commanders and told them something none of them expected. Germany was going to attack. Not a spoiling attack, not a local counterattack, not a defensive counteroffensive. A full strategic offensive aimed at splitting the Anglo-American alliance in half. The target was Antwerp. Antwerp was the largest port on the Allied logistical map, the port through which most Allied supplies had begun to flow after October 1944. If Germany could capture Antwerp, 3 things would happen at once. The Northern Allied armies, Montgomery's 21st Army Group and the U.S. First Army, would be cut off from their supply chain. Bradley's 12th Army Group to the south would be split from Montgomery to the north. And Britain, Hitler believed, might sue for peace, freeing Germany to concentrate everything against the Soviet Union. The plan was audacious. It was also based on a single essential assumption, that Germany could still fight a mobile war. Before we continue, I'm Charles Mercer, and this is the World War II Grognard. My grandson Will and I spend countless hours researching and writing these documentaries because we believe the Second World War deserves to be understood, not just remembered. Independent channels like ours survive because of people who choose to subscribe. If you enjoy this kind of history, we'd be honored to have you with us. It truly means more to us than you might imagine. Now, back to the story. For 6 weeks before the attack, Germany did something remarkable. Approximately 500,000 men, 25 divisions, and hundreds of tanks were moved into forming up areas behind the Western Front, without Allied intelligence detecting any of it. How was that possible? Radio silence was near absolute. Orders were delivered by hand. Movement happened at night. Aerial reconnaissance was hampered by 6 weeks of bad weather. Ultra-decrypts, which had illuminated German operations for years, showed only routine communications. Allied intelligence saw what Allied intelligence expected to see: a defeated German army preparing for the coming Soviet offensive in the east. The section of the front Germany chose to attack was the Ardennes. The Ardennes was held by 4 American divisions, the 4th and 28th Infantry, both refitting after heavy fighting in the Hurtgen Forest, and the brand new 106th Infantry Division, which had reached the line 10 days earlier. 80 miles of front, 4 divisions. The sector was considered so quiet that Allied command used it deliberately as a rest area for battered units and a training ground for green ones. The Germans also prepared a smaller operation designed to multiply the confusion of the first hours. Operation Greif. A special unit under SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny, the man who had rescued Mussolini the year before, trained roughly 2,000 German soldiers to operate behind American lines in captured American uniforms, driving captured American vehicles. The actual military effect of Greif was minor. Only around 44 commandos ever operated behind the lines. The psychological effect was enormous. For the first week of the offensive, American MPs stopped every soldier they met and asked baseball questions no German could answer. The results of the first 4 days were exactly what German planning had promised. The 106th Infantry Division, the newest formation in the line, was overrun in less than 72 hours. Approximately 7,000 American soldiers surrendered, the largest single U.S. Army surrender in the European theater. German panzer columns punched through the front, drove west, captured American headquarters at Malmedy and St. Vith, and by December 20th, were more than 30 miles inside the Allied lines. For those 4 days, it looked to some Allied commanders as if 1940 had returned. The German army was moving through the Ardennes exactly as it had 4.5 years earlier. The same forest, the same speed, the same shock. The surprise had worked. By December 20th, the offensive looked frighteningly real. American headquarters were collapsing. Entire divisions had disappeared. German armored columns were still advancing west. To many Allied commanders, it looked disturbingly similar to May 1940. And for the first time in months, some people began asking an impossible question. Had Germany actually found a way back into the war? The German plan for the Ardennes offensive was not to break through and inflict damage. It was to break through, cross the Meuse River within 72 hours, drive northwest to Antwerp within 7 days, and split the entire Allied 12th and 21st Army groups. Every element of the plan depended on capturing bridges intact. Bridges across the Ourthe, bridges across the Meuse, bridges across the road network of eastern Belgium, a terrain of narrow forest roads, steep hills, and river valleys that had defeated multiple military planners for the previous 2,000 years. The timetable was extraordinary. Day 1, penetrate American positions. Day 2, reach the Meuse. Day 3, cross the Meuse. Day 4, drive on Brussels. Day 7, reach Antwerp. Every day already allocated. Every delay compounding into every following day. The offensive had no room for ordinary problems. And ordinary problems, in the Ardennes in December 1944, were guaranteed. Weather that could ground reinforcements, roads that could collapse under armor, bridges that Allied engineers might blow before capture, small American units that might delay a panzer column for hours. Any one of these could steal a day from the timetable. And there were no days to steal. If everything was working, why weren't the Germans celebrating? The maps showed a real advance. The armored columns were moving. Peiper was already 30 miles inside American lines. The Meuse River was within reach. Every element the German plan had asked for on paper was actually happening on the ground. There was one thing almost nobody outside German headquarters understood. The offensive had started without enough fuel to finish it. Here is where the offensive's real enemy appears. It was not the Americans. It was logistics. By December of 1944, German oil production had collapsed. The Ploesti oil fields, which had produced most of German fuel for years, had been captured by Soviet forces in August 1944. Synthetic fuel plants inside Germany had been targeted and largely destroyed by the U.S. 8th Air Force's oil campaign in the same year. Wehrmacht fuel stockpiles in the fall of 1944 were the smallest they had been at any point in the war. The Wehrmacht that attacked in the Ardennes was, in one sense, not the mechanized army of 1940. Roughly 80% of German transport in 1944 was still horse-drawn. The armored spearheads had trucks and half-tracks, but the infantry divisions supporting them moved at the speed of a walking horse. An army whose infantry moved at 19th century speed was being asked to fight a 20th century mechanized war. Here is the fact that reveals more about the German plan than almost anything else. Germany entered the offensive already assuming it would capture Allied fuel depots. Not as a bonus, not as a contingency, as a fundamental element of the plan. Wehrmacht fuel stocks at the start of the operation were sufficient for approximately half the projected advance. The remainder was expected to come from American fuel depots along the route, depots that had to be captured intact before American troops could destroy them. The offensive needed victories that had not happened yet, simply to continue moving. While German columns searched for captured American gasoline, American fuel convoys continued arriving from Antwerp almost without interruption. Every mile Germany advanced made its own supply problem worse. Every mile the Allies lost shortened theirs. The Ardennes was not chosen because it was easy terrain. It was chosen precisely because it was hard terrain. Hard enough that the Allies had assumed no serious offensive could pass through it. The road network of the Ardennes consisted, in most sectors, of 1 to 2 paved roads per division front. Roads that had been designed for pre-war Belgian rural traffic. Roads that were, in December, covered with ice and snow. Onto those roads, Germany was pushing 3 armies. Tanks, half-tracks, artillery, ammunition trucks, fuel trucks, repair crews, engineers, signals units, horse-drawn infantry supply columns, staff cars. Every element competing for the same handful of narrow roads. The result was almost paradoxical. Success itself slowed success. The faster the German spearheads advanced, the more congested the roads behind them became. Traffic jams stretching back 20 kilometers formed within the first 3 days. The most famous example was Kampfgruppe Peiper, the armored spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, commanded by SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper. Peiper's column was the fastest-moving German formation of the offensive. It was also the most spectacular failure. Peiper's advance was measured in hours between fuel exhaustion crises. He captured an American fuel depot at Bulge and refueled his column. He tried and failed to capture the much larger fuel depot at Stavelot. He was, by December 19th, only 3 days into the offensive, running on captured American gasoline and abandoned equipment. His column would grind to a halt near La Glaise on December 24th, out of fuel, and be destroyed piece by piece over the following 48 hours. Peiper started the offensive with roughly 4,800 men and 117 armored vehicles. He walked out on foot on Christmas Day with about 800 men. The armor was left behind. The German offensive did not run out of will. It ran out of fuel and roads. On the German side, every road led away from its fuel. On the Allied side, every road led toward the battlefield. While German panzer columns were slowing, one American army was doing the opposite. 300 miles to the south, General George Patton's Third Army had already begun pivoting 90 degrees north. 6 divisions, 250 tanks, 25,000 vehicles. In 72 hours, on winter roads, in December weather. Patton would break into the southern flank of the Bulge on December 22nd. While Germany's armored spearheads were dying of thirst, America's armored spearheads were being redirected across half of Europe on the strength of a single order. You cannot make a documentary about the Battle of the Bulge without mentioning Bastogne. But it is important to be careful about why. Bastogne is remembered because it was cinematic. A road junction. 7 roads meeting at one Belgian town. The 101st Airborne Division under Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, surrounded by German forces, out of supplies, holding for 8 days until Patton's Third Army broke through from the south on December 26th. The famous surrender demand. The famous reply, nuts. That story is real. It happened. It matters. But it was not the whole story. Because even if Bastogne had fallen, even if the 101st Airborne had been overrun on December 22nd instead of holding through Christmas, the German offensive would still have been doomed. Why? Because Bastogne was one symptom. It was not the disease. Even without Bastogne, the fundamental problems of the offensive would have remained. Fuel would still have run out at approximately the same point. Roads would still have been jammed. Bridges would still have been blown before capture. The weather would still have cleared on December 23rd. American reinforcements would still have arrived from the north and south. Air power would still have returned. Bastogne is the story we remember because it is the story with a face. The story that killed the offensive had no face. It was written in fuel tables, road capacities, and weather forecasts. For the first 7 days of the offensive, Germany had one ally that had nothing to do with tanks or artillery. The weather. Fog, low cloud, and steady snow had grounded most Allied air power for the 6 weeks before the attack, and continued to ground it for the first 7 days after. Without air reconnaissance, Allied commanders could not see the German columns moving through the forest. Without close air support, American units could not call in the fighter bombers that would normally have decimated a German armored advance. For those 7 days, Germany fought the war Germany had built for. December 23, 1944. The clouds broke. Within hours, hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts, RAF Typhoons, and medium bombers were in the air over the Ardennes. They found what they had been prevented from finding for a week. Long columns of German vehicles, packed onto narrow roads, unable to disperse, unable to hide, immobilized by fuel shortages and traffic congestion. Convoys burned. Fuel trucks exploded. Bridges the Germans had captured intact were now attacked from the air before they could be used. Supply columns that had been struggling to keep up with the spearheads simply stopped. The German offensive did not suddenly begin fighting worse on December 23rd. The Germans on the ground fought as hard on December 24th as they had on December 16th. The assumptions behind the plan simply disappeared. By December 25th, the German offensive was consuming itself. Panzer divisions that had been leading the advance were stopping. Some ran out of fuel and could not be refueled. Others were destroyed from the air. Others were bogged down in the narrow roads behind bridges that had been demolished by American engineers before capture. Crews of the newest German tanks, the Panther and the King Tiger, began abandoning their vehicles when the fuel gauges reached zero. Hundreds of perfectly serviceable Panthers, King Tigers, assault guns, did not burn. They did not explode. They simply stopped. One by one, their engines fell silent. Not because the crews lacked courage, because the fuel gauges had reached zero. The reserves, the divisions Germany had held back to exploit an initial success, were now being fed into the front line just to hold ground. which meant Germany had no reserves left for the 2,000-kilometer Eastern Front, where the Soviet winter offensive would begin on January 12th. The comparison is stark. On December 16th, the German offensive had aimed at Antwerp, 120 miles from the start line. By January 25th, when the last German units had been pushed back to their original positions, the deepest German penetration had been about 50 miles, less than half the distance to the Meuse River, less than one-third of the distance to Antwerp. And in return for that 50 miles, Germany had committed nearly every operational reserve it possessed on the Western Front, and lost most of them. An offensive that had needed miracles to succeed had instead consumed everything Germany had left. For 80 years, the Battle of the Bulge has been remembered as Hitler's last gamble, sometimes as a heroic defense by outnumbered American units, sometimes as an example of poor German intelligence, sometimes as evidence of Hitler's operational overreach. All of these contain part of the truth. None of them explain the whole thing. Here is what actually killed the offensive. The plan required a sequence of successes: surprise, bad weather, initial breakthrough, American confusion. Germany achieved every element of the first list, every single one. And it was not enough. Because after the first list came a second list. Fuel enough to reach the Meuse, bridges captured intact, weather that stayed bad long enough, roads that could carry 3 armies at once, American units that would collapse rather than delay, no serious counterattack from north or south. Time. Fuel ran short by day 3. Bridges were blown before capture. Weather cleared on day 7. Roads were jammed from day 1. American units held rather than collapsed. Patton's Third Army began rotating north on day 3. And time, the one thing Germany needed most, was the one thing it could not manufacture. Germany achieved exactly what it hoped for on the first morning. Everything after that depended on resources it no longer possessed. The first list had 4 items. Germany completed all 4. The second list had 7. Germany could not complete a single one. Surprise was not the point of the offensive. Surprise was only the admission ticket. Return, one last time, to Antwerp. The offensive was never truly about Bastogne, or Malmedy, or Kampfgruppe Peiper. It was about reaching Antwerp before the Allies could recover. Germany never came close. The farthest German unit, a reconnaissance element of the 2nd Panzer Division, got within about 3 miles of the Meuse near Celle on December 24th. It ran out of fuel. It was destroyed by British and American units in the following 48 hours. That was the deepest point of the offensive, roughly 75 miles from Antwerp. The cost was extraordinary. American casualties, killed, wounded, captured, missing, reached approximately 89,000. It remains the single most costly battle in U.S. military history in terms of American casualties. German casualties are harder to establish precisely, but estimates range from 60 to 100,000. The Germans also lost equipment they could not replace. Approximately 600 to 800 armored vehicles, hundreds of aircraft, and roughly a quarter of the operational strength of the Western Front's mobile reserves. Everything Germany lost in the Ardennes, it needed everywhere else. The Soviet Vistula-Oder offensive, which began on January 12th while the Bulge was still being pushed back, met a Wehrmacht Eastern Front that had received no reserves for 3 months because those reserves had been sent to the Ardennes. The Red Army reached the Oder River, 40 miles from Berlin, by early February. The Ardennes offensive did not just fail. It accelerated Germany's defeat. On the morning of December 16th, 1944, Germany proved it could still surprise the most powerful military coalition in history. Over the weeks that followed, the Battle of the Bulge proved something more important. Tactical brilliance could still win battles. Operational surprise could still work. German soldiers on the ground could still fight as hard as they had in 1940. But by the winter of 1944, Germany no longer possessed the logistical, industrial, and operational strength required to turn those victories into strategic success. The Battle of the Bulge reminds us that tactical brilliance can still shock the world. Operational surprise can still deceive an enemy. Courage can still win extraordinary victories. But by the winter of 1944, Germany no longer possessed the industrial strength to transform those victories into strategy. In the end, the Ardennes Offensive proved something larger than itself. No army can outrun its own logistics forever. The surprise worked. The mathematics of war did not. Thank you for watching. If this is the kind of history you're looking for, subscribe. There's always another story waiting. The next documentary starts right after this one.